titled Hiring for Results. Today, you will learn strategies and practices used by high-performing managers to recruit, hire, and retain the most qualified, results-focused candidate for the job, thus impacting the revenue, service, and profitability of the organization. Glenna Hecht, the president and founder of Humanistic Consulting, will be leading this informative webinar for us today. She has an impressive 35-year career leading HR, training, and employee development and engagement programs for high-growth corporations such as Starbucks, the Levy Restaurants at Walt Disney World, Accenture, Romano's Macaroni Grill, and Marshall Fields. Glenna knows that a great people strategy is measured through execution and results. Couple this with her do the right thing philosophy, and you have a winning combination that has led to significant, notable outcomes to her clients' ROI. Glenna has supported both retailers, wholesalers, and growers in the floral industry and has been a featured speaker at the Society of American Florists Convention, the International Floriculture Expo, and the Wholesale Florist and Florist Supplier Association Conference. In addition to being the author of the book Profits from the Inside Out, that features tips for engaging employees in the workplace, Glenna is also a featured columnist for Floral Pulse, Florist Review, and Floral Management magazines. Once Glenna is finished with her presentation, we will open the webinar up for questions. If you have a question, simply type it in that question box on the upper right side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions during the presentation, and we'll hold them until the Q&A portion of the webinar. So without further ado, I will turn the call over to Glenna to begin the webinar. Glenna?
Janet, thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, Hiring for Results. For those of you that I know, it's to reconnect with you, and for those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting before, I hope this information is informative and you find that there's some useful tips and tricks in hiring for, we're getting to Thanksgiving and starting to prepare for Valentine's Day and all of the things that are coming in 2020, and look forward to helping you with this. So I will let you know that I'm in an airport, so if you hear your gate being called in the background and you decide to take a great trip, let Janet and I know, as we'd love to be a part of that. But without further ado, let's get going. There's a handout here that will refer to much of the information that I'm sharing with you, and you'll also have an opportunity during the course of the webinar to answer some polling questions so that we can get your input as well. So let's get started. So here's what we're going to talk about. You're going to gain an understanding of some performance research, success strategies for interviewing and recruiting, the new recruiting paradigm, what it is that you need to do, and we're going to talk about some new and exciting opportunities, behavioral interviewing, the flow of the interview, orientation and onboarding, and those are two different things. Your burning questions and then key takeaways. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about performance research. Everybody's goal, of course, in recruiting and hiring is to get the brightest bulb in the box. But I'm sure some of you have had a challenge where you hire someone and they come in and they're not exactly the person that you thought that they would be, or over time they become less engaged or perform less effectively. So this webinar is focused on how do you try to get the best person to match the description that you have for your role and the functions of the job. So let's share some research with you. First off, let's talk about the cost of a bad hire. So Career Builder found that 41% of the companies that they polled estimated that the cost of turnover and the cost of a bad hire was greater than $25,000. I would guess that that's probably not as accurate as it might be. If you would agree with me, you probably know that it's higher than that. The Department of Labor estimates that the cost of a bad hire is 30% of the first year earnings. Let's talk about what first year earnings look like. So sometimes we think it's just the wages that people make. Well, it is. But then add to that the cost of unemployment, taxes, benefits that you offer, training and development, the cost of training other people, the cost of filling in while somebody is learning the job, the cost of interviewing, and you can see that that starts to add up fairly significantly. You'll also notice in the third bullet here that Robert Half, which is a very popular organization for staffing in the financial services area, polled a group of CFOs, and the majority, 30% of them, found that found that 39% supervisors spend 17% of their time managing poor performers. Okay, let's take a look at that and think about the fact that I work a 40-hour week. Well, of course, we know nobody works a 40-hour week, but let's just use that for easy math. And if we were to say 17%, what that translates to is that about 8 to 10 hours of the time that somebody is actually working as a supervisor, they're having to micromanage poor performers. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but if you have, it's a drain on your time. And really what that means is, as a manager and a supervisor, you're working outside of the typical hour to be able to make up the time for your duties. Now, look at the last point. The Harvard Business Review said 80% of turnover is a result of a bad hire. You know, I guess it's probably closer to 100%, but let's assume that some of it is just circumstantial. Some of it may be that we hire people and don't get the business that we thought that we were going to, and so that could be a cause of turnover as well. We'll assume 80% might be close to realistic. Let's go on to the next slide. So here's the other cost of a bad hire, which is significant and probably much more important, is that there's faster burnout for good employees who pick up the slack. So I'm sure some of you have experienced this in your own organization. Somebody's not doing 100% of their job, but the job still needs to get done. So the question is, who picks it up? That who may be you, and you may be the person who's actually having to do much more because somebody's doing much less, and that tends to burn people out and can cause resentment amongst the people that are on your team. So the first polling question that we want to ask you is this your hiring reality? Do you ever feel like sometimes you're in the middle of a tornado or a cyclone and that it keeps spinning? So if you would take a moment and just answer whether or not for you this is yes or no, we'd appreciate it.
All right, we've got some results coming in, it looks like.
Good. And you can share with me what those are. Thanks,
yep,
Janet.
Erin will post those onto the screen.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll tell you why this really hits home. I have the pleasure of living in Dallas, Texas. And about 3 weeks ago, we had a tornado touch down in Dallas, Texas. And here's what I learned. I've never really been through that before. Some of you may have. But here's what it looked like. It comes in, and it's quite unexpected. It creates some havoc while it's going on, and a lot of fear of the unknown. And then once it sort of touches down and disperses, you don't know what's going to happen on the other end, but it leaves real distress in its wake, and it takes a while to recover. Now, I don't know about you, but when I've hired somebody and they're not the right somebody, it tends to mirror exactly what that tornado felt like. All of a sudden I go, whoa, what did I do? It touches down, it spins me around, and it may be a situation where all of a sudden I'm left with my feet not on the ground and a roof not feeling as though it's over my head. So Janet, what are those results that people were sharing?
It was 80% said yes and 20% said no.
Yep, so here's our 80-20 rule. So for those of you that are the 20%, bravo to you. I hope that that stays with you. And you can look at this as a preventative, proactive measure. For those of you that are in the middle of the tornado, let's talk about some things to potentially move you forward, and that is that I have shared a number of these strategies over the course of years, and some of them may be ones that you've heard before that are familiar. Every single year, I take every one of my clients through the same success strategy. And even if they've done it before, they do it again. Why? Because their business changes, the market changes, their people change. And you can never really say, if I did this once, it's going to be like this for a long period of time. You always have to proactively plan, and that's what this is all about. So let's talk about these strategies. Number one strategy is know why people are leaving. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into this. So if I were to ask you, I want you to grab just a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to scribble right now for just a second, do you know why people are leaving? Yes or no? And then we're going to come back to that in just a moment. Okay, everybody got it? Great. The second point is we're going to analyze your top performers. And then we're going to talk about don't minimize your standards. Now you may say, well, Glenna, that's easy for you to say if you had a lot of people applying, but I don't. So how can I not minimize my standards? Well, I'm going to talk to you about the rule of thumb. That's what's below. And really, when you find that you're in a bit of a crunch and you have to hire out of necessity, what does that mean you continue to do? And we're going to talk about that. So treat candidates as customers, and then finally to use consistent behavioral interviewing. So do you know why people are leaving? We're going to open up the poll, and you're going to see that you have a number of multiple choice answers here. And I want you to check as many as are applicable for your organization. Why are people leaving? What causes them to decide that it's no longer a location that they want to work at? So if we can open the polls.
All right, so we've got some people giving us some selections right now.
Good.
Everybody just take a minute to go ahead and select, like Glenna said, everything that, all the selections that apply.
Thank you for participating.
All right, and we'll go ahead and close the poll now. We've got most people voted.
Excellent. So
And
Janet, what did you find?
Aaron is showing us that 100% of the people are leaving for better compensation and or benefits. Next is 60% for career growth, 40% for better work schedule of days and hours, and then it's split 20% each, problems with management, and then they don't know.
Okay, got it. So everyone is basically saying people are offering more, offering better. So the question becomes, how do you combat that? What are some things that you need to do? Well, first, information is power. So when we look at the very next slide, whoops, if we can bring that up. I seem to have lost my screen on my end. Let's see. Got it. Okay, let's see if we can go to the next slide. Nope. Aaron, we may need your help for whatever reason. We're
Glenna,
not
just use
able
the
to
arrow key.
advance it.
Just there you
Let's
go.
try that. Okay, got it. All right, you got it? Thank you, Janet. I appreciate it. So here's the first thing I would tell you. You need to know what other people are offering, and then you need to sell the things that you offer that are benefits for you. So in your trade area, not only retailers that may be florists, but other businesses, because at the end of the day, you're competing with some of the other organizations that are out there, whether they're restaurants or hotels or retail environments or office environments. So you need to go out there and understand what are the benefits, the compensation, what's the career path, what do they offer in training, how do they give back to people? What's their culture, their reputation? What do they offer and how do you compare? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're going to say, how do I find all that stuff? And doesn't it take time? Well, it may take a little bit of an afternoon for you to sit down and take a look at it. But in terms of how you find that, go on Indeed and do a search in your zip code for other employers that are looking for people. And so you may say, if I'm looking for a designer that might be comparable to a retail position or a retail person, look and see what other organizations are recruiting and what are they offering online. And if they say, this is the benefits, this is the career path, it's 90 days, you get a review, things of that nature, you need to know what people have. Not that you're always going to be able to compare to it, but if it comes up in an interview, then you're prepared to talk about it. So the key here really is information is key. You can always be prepared and discuss what you know, but you're caught off guard with what you don't. Here's the key. If you're a retailer and you participate in something like Pedal It Forward, I would bet you there are no other businesses out there that are doing something like that. You may have opportunities for people to do floral education through FTD. You may have opportunities for people to work on events, for people to learn floral design, for people to actually make a difference in somebody else's life in a different way. That's a benefit that you have to start looking to market, sell, and communicate during your ads and online. So let's say that your compensation isn't in line, and maybe it's time for you to think about giving some more in terms of compensation. It may mean that you have some fewer people that you are offering more money to, and that in order for you to attract and retain, that your wages need to be more competitive. So I always recommend doing this research once every 6 months, because the market changes that quickly and sometimes even more quickly. So one of the things that you need to know is, how do you compare? And then when you know how you compare, here's the key. I would say the absolute most important thing that you have to make a part of what you do are the first 2 bullets that are here. And one is recruit every single day. Now, here's a statistic you may not know. And if I tell you, promise you won't let it scare you, but good candidates are typically not on the market for longer than 18 hours. That's right, 18 hours. Let me share with you a funny story that I think you're going to find somewhat shocking. So just recently, I was in a convention, and I was listening to some individuals talking about recruiting, and I was presenting after they were. And they made that statistic and mentioned that. And I heard it, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's very aggressive. Well, one of my clients was looking for a manager, and I happened to be on Indeed during this presentation, and I got a great resume. And I thought, let's see whether this is true or not. So I got a candidate that was terrific, and she responded to me at 10:56 a.m. I wrote her back at about 11:04, and I said, you have a great resume. I'd love to interview you. At 11:08, 4 minutes later, she wrote me back and said, you can call me now. And I said, nope, I can't. I'm in the middle of a presentation, and I'm presenting right after. How about 1 o'clock in the afternoon? And she said, fine. Well, do you know, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she'd already been contacted by a couple of other organizations. I was able to get her in quickly to the company that I was working with, but it wasn't a match. But imagine that in the next couple of days, and they talked to her 2 days after I talked to her, that she had already had 2 offers from other companies. So here's the key. People come up all the time, but they may be taken very, very quickly. So you have to recruit and contact every single day. I apologize, Delta announcements. The second is place ads and sell to your strengths. Talk about things like Pedal It Forward. Talk about the beautiful many varieties of flowers that you sell. Talk about the fact that you make a difference to people's weddings. Talk about the fact that you have growth, that you have the opportunity to have people have flowers at a discount if that's something that you offer in your business. But sell to your strengths and be proud of the things that you offer. Talk about the position, the impact on the business, the hours that they work and the shifts, the compensation, the benefits you do offer, and the desired results. So it's very interesting One of the things that came up yesterday, I was having a discussion regarding this very topic, and someone said, how much should I actually disclose in the ad about what I offer? And I said, don't hide it, because that way you're saving yourself time and you're saving the candidate time in moving forward. So let's talk about the next success strategy, which is hiring for the top 20% or hiring high performers. So does everybody, I hope, see the line in front of you? And you'll notice that the line has an X on one side and an X on the other. So what I'd like you to do is, if you would, draw this line on a piece of paper in front of you with two X's, one on either end. And then we're going to do a very quick exercise. So I'm going to give you just a moment to draw that, and then I'm going to explain to you what's here. Okay, everybody's ready. We're going to look on the right side of the line. We're going to look right over here. And what I'd like you to do is to write the initials of the people that work with you that are rock star high performers. So if you don't have any currently, I'm sorry, think of the ones that you've had before. And if you have a bunch of them, write a lot of initials that are there. But the people that you say to yourself, oh my God, they're amazing. If I could have them with me all the time, if I could have their sisters, brothers, cousins, friends work with me that are just like them, I would be in great shape. Write their initials on the right side of the line. Got it? Great. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the left side of the line. So what I'd like you to do is erase that, and we're going to take a look at the people that worked with you that, oh, they were tough. They were the people that you felt like you had to micromanage. They were that 17% that you were always having to follow through. As a matter of fact, there were a couple of times you might have caught yourself saying, oh, I wish that they would resign. My life would be so much easier. So if you can think of those people, I'd like you to write their initials on the left-hand side. Take a minute. Got it? Great. Now here's the key. The chances are that the differences between the left side and the right side had nothing to do with whether they could ring a cash register, or whether they were a great designer, or whether or not they were able to organize flowers in a warehouse, or whether they did great deliveries. It probably was more about not what they do, but who they be. Are they people of integrity and energy and follow through, great communications? And you might find that the people on the right side have those skills in force, and the people on the left side not so much. So if you look at the second question here, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to write down the characteristics of the people that are on the right side of the line, the ones that you say, those are the things that I want to look for in all of my employees going forward, whether it is showing up on time, doing what I ask, doing more than what I ask, doing a thorough job, getting along well with others, completing the work. So I want you to take a moment right now and write those qualities down. It's very important. Does everybody have it? Great. This is a trick that I've been using for years, and it is the best hiring strategy that I have ever learned and developed on my own. And here's what I would tell you to do. Make a line right down the middle, and I want it to be a vertical line, really small line. And when you interview someone, I want you to ask yourself the question after the interview, are they more like the person on the right side of the line, or are they more like the person on the left side of the line? Here's the reason why. If I'm on the left side of the line and I'm here, it will take a lot of work, not only on the part of the employee, but on your part as well, to get them to be a performer on the right side of the line. You've seen people that have made a shift, but sometimes when they do, it's because of years and years of hard work, or it's because there's an a life event that occurs that causes them to be different than they are. So the question you have to ask yourself is, do I really have the time to train somebody to get to the right side of the line? If the answer is no, then don't put yourself and the candidate through it. It's not worth it. If you interview someone and you go, yep, they're about here, then you know with some coaching and development, they could get over a little bit to the right and a little bit to the right and a little bit to the right. And so the key here is to hire for the top 20%, those characteristics that you know are important for the people that are in your organization. So let's move on. Here's the key. And remember I said to you, don't minimize your standards. You want to make your hiring tough is you're managing easy. When you hire easy and you hire the first person that comes along, the managing is tough. That's the 17%. That's micromanaging. And that's when you actually have to do the heavy lifting. Here's the only rule of thumb. And that is, look at the bottom of this page. Don't minimize your standards. What I mean by that is, you need what you need. You need performance on the right side of the line. You need people that have those characteristics: integrity, service, follow through, trustworthiness. And that's really important. But sometimes you're in a pickle. And sometimes you don't have the option of finding lots of people and you're stretched and you need to hire someone. Well, let's say that happens and you go, okay, I know this isn't the best candidate for me, but I really need somebody right now. You can bring them in, but here's the key. The next day, you continue to hire and recruit, and you're always looking for the person that supports you so that you don't have to minimize your standards. The second piece of that is to make sure that you treat your talent as customers. What do I mean by that? Well, if I ordered from you and I ordered a bouquet and I asked you questions and I said, you know, tell me how much it costs. Tell me what comes with it. Give me all of the information. Tell me about, does somebody have to be here to deliver? You would answer all of my questions and you would be transparent and candid and trustworthy, as you always are with your customers. I recommend you do exactly the same thing with your candidates. And if you look back at the slide that's here, be specific when describing the role and your expectations. If somebody is going to be in a cold cooler, tell them. If someone's going to be on their feet 7 hours, tell them. If someone's going to have to clean a restroom, tell them up front. If they don't want to do that, better you find out before you hire them than after you hire them. That level of candor and honesty is what you would do with the customer. That's what you want to do with a candidate as well. And so I always say, yes, absolutely. Share that information in a way that treats people with respect and dignity, but most of all, allows you to hire the right people for you and make your job easier and the team work together more effectively and be engaged. Let's go on. So one of the other hiring strategies, success strategies, is to use consistent behavioral interviewing. So the three questions that are listed here are three different types of questions. Here's the key. One of the things that I'd like you to be able to do is to have a sheet of paper that you pull out of a folder, and it has standard questions that you ask of every person that's a designer, every person that's a customer service person, every person that's a driver, any person that's doing the similar job. You already are having those questions, so you don't have to think about them. But let me explain what these are. So the first type of question is a close-ended question. And here's some points you may want to write down. A close-ended question can only be answered with a yes or a no. So if you said to me, do you have reliable transportation? I might say yes, I might say no, or I might say, well, gosh, it depends on the bus schedule, or sometimes my husband takes the car and I'm not sure it's going to work, or, you know, I have an old clunker and it's been giving me some trouble lately and the battery keeps dying. Well, when I answer questions like that, the answer really is no. I don't have trustworthy transportation, which means I may not get to work on time. So closed-ended questions are a yes or a no. And here's the key. You only have 2 close-ended questions that you can ask in an interview, only 2. And that is typically, can you work this schedule? Yes or no. And do you have reliable transportation? Yes or no. All of the other questions are type 2 and type 3. Type 2 questions are open-ended questions. Those are behavioral questions. We're going to go through the formula in just a minute. Open-ended questions can't be answered with a yes or no, and they are usually answered with some type of descriptor. So if you said to somebody, tell me about a time that you worked on a great team, what made the team great, what was your role in it, and how would you replicate that in the future, that can't be answered with a yes or a no. If you said to someone, tell me about a time you had a difficult customer situation, what was the situation, what did you do, and how would you handle it again in the future, can't answer it with a yes or a no. So an open-ended question has to be descriptive in my response. The formula is you only have 5 to 7 pre-prepared open-ended questions. So what we have so far are 2 close-ended and 5 to 7 open-ended questions. And then 1 hypothetical question that you have prepared. That could be something like, a person comes in 10 minutes before the store is ready to close and says that they need a number of bouquets. The wedding florist that they were working with just told them they couldn't fulfill the order and they need a whole raft of things, and they saw that you were open, can you help? Now, you, of course, would say yes, but if I was working the front counter, you want to make sure that I say yes as well, and I don't say, well, we're about to close in 10 minutes. So you might want to prepare a question like that and say, what would you do? How would you think through it? How would you handle that situation? So 2 close-ended, 5 to 7 open-ended, and 1 hypothetical. Here's the next. So what's the formula? The formula for an open-ended question is something called an SBO. It's just 3 easy steps, and that stands for situation, behavior, and outcome. So a situation starts with the words, tell me about a time, describe, give me an example of. So you're asking somebody to illuminate a situation, and then you're going to think about whether it is a teamwork, customer service, something along those lines. The behavior is, what did you do? What was your part of it? How did you handle it? And the outcome is, and what was the result? And what might you do differently? So here's a good example. Do you ever feel like that with the person with the lemons, where you go, oh my gosh, constant pressure gets to all of us after a long period of time. Tell me about a time where you did not handle pressure well and why this occurred. What did you do? What was the outcome? And what would you do differently if faced with the situation today? Great example. So when you look here, here's a short description. Here is the situation. Here is the outcome and behavior and what you would do going forward. Feel free to use that question. So that's one of your 5 to 7. Now you only have a number of other ones that you need to come up with. And a lot of people say, well, if I'm interviewing people that are younger, will they be able to answer this question? And the answer is absolutely. They may have pressure at school, pressure on a football team, pressure with band, pressure working on a team project. And so we make the assumption that they may not be able to answer this, and the key here is, yes, absolutely they can. So let's go on. Let's talk about the flow of the interview. How do you do the interview? So here's the key. One of the things that you're going to do is, let's assume one of 2 things. One is that you have the person coming into interview with you face to face. The other option is that you're interviewing them over the telephone. So here's an alternative that I want you to consider. If you know that you're going to be interviewing somebody and you're not face to face, let's identify an alternative to face to face. So right now we're on GoToMeeting. Another option that you might want to consider is something called Zoom, Z-O-O-M. And what you might choose to do is when you know somebody can't meet with you face to face, you would put Zoom in your app, and it's almost like a Skype or an iPad, an interview, and you're actually talking to a person through the application on your phone, and you're absolutely able to see them, hear them, interact with them, and start to develop a relationship, because then you can watch them and you can see if their body language is in alignment with what they're saying. Remember, 80% of the interview and communication is what you see versus what you hear. So when you're looking at me, you can see that I'm excited and I'm happy and I love sharing this information. You may or may not be able to pick that up if you were just to hear me over the phone. So I'd recommend that every person that you talk to on the phone, you set that up and ask them to put the Zoom app in their phone, and that you're going to have an interaction that's there. Now, if they say to you, I'm not comfortable doing things like that, that's a red flag for you. That tells you that they may not be as comfortable doing some of the orders or taking some of the orders that are online. So it's a great way to understand whether or not they have that technological capability as well. But let's say they're coming in or over the phone. You're going to review the application and resume, and you're going to greet them and say hello, and then you're going to set an agenda for the interview. Now you may be saying, what's an agenda? So here goes, and you may want to write this down. The agenda is, I'm asking you a series of questions that I ask every single candidate for this type of role. I'm going to be asking you questions that you'll be very comfortable with, and you'll notice that from time to time, I might look down because I'm taking some notes. Once I'm finished with my questions, you'll have a chance to ask your questions, which I'd love to answer, and then we'll talk about next steps, and then the interview will be completed. Once the interview is over, you evaluate the candidate immediately. And the reason you do that is you get off the phone, you start to do your work, and you forget, what was the answer to that question? And sometimes we fill in the blanks, and it's not always exactly what we would hope it would be. Now remember the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule is the candidate talks 80% of the time, and you only talk 20% of the time. Why is that? Because you have a job, and so that's the important part of it. Let's talk about orientation and onboarding, and we have a poll that's here. And the question is, how many of you have a robust orientation and onboarding program? So I'm going to ask Janet to open the poll.
Yep, we've got the poll open. If everybody can just take a second
Excellent.
to select their answer.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Janet.
Yep, we've got answers coming in, and go ahead and close that. All right, so 60% said yes, 40% said no.
Okay, so let me give you something here that's a little formulaic, and I promise you that the 60% that have it, you may learn some things that you want to add to yours, and the 40%, here's some things to do to start. So either way, everybody's going to learn something through this process. But first, what I want to do is to differentiate for you the difference between orientation and onboarding, because they're two different things. So orientation is basically the sign. It's welcome aboard. It is that first day, bringing them to the table, and basically what you're doing in orientation is you're giving them a big picture overview. What would be included in that would be history of the company, the kinds of things that your organization does, what the structure might be, what kinds of flowers that you carry in the events that you do, your busy times of the year. So just sort of a 10,000-foot view, a big umbrella, so it says this is what we have. I want to welcome them to the organization, and typically what I do in welcoming people would be giving them some things that might be branded, so maybe they get a t-shirt or a hat. Certainly what I would do on orientation for anybody that's starting is I would give them flowers to bring home once they're finished working with you for the day. Why? Because when they bring them home to their spouse, their child, their parent, any loved one, they now are a part of working with this person for your organization. So you're inviting the family member in to be a part of it. This is when you want to introduce the culture, the mission, the vision, the standards of conduct. Now, what do I mean by standards of conduct? Those are the things that you say they're no voters. They are absolutely the most important to you. And I'll share with you some of mine. So I have a very small team, but my team knows that we have each other's back. We always trust that each other is doing the right thing, and we seek to understand before we jump to a conclusion. So in the consulting business, I may be there one week and somebody may be there the next week, and I walk in and I scratch my head and go, I'm not really sure why they did that. And I'll pick up the phone and say, could you walk me through this decision? And more often than not, I would say almost 100% of the time, once they explain, it's exactly what I would have done. So instead of jumping to conclusions and saying something that I will regret later, we have a standard of conduct, which is trust that the other person has the right motives and they're always doing the right thing. So I would say to you, what's yours? What are the things that kind of make you crazy when they don't happen? And so let's take just a moment right now. If you would get a piece of paper and jot down what are some of those things while it's fresh in your mind that you go, oh, I got to be really clear up front that this is something very important to me that they have to do. So everybody just take a minute and write that down. Got it? Great. So what's next? You would have the employee complete new hire paperwork unless you do that online in advance of their first day. And you would identify a position that I call a brand ambassador. Now, this is a person on your team. If you were to put this kind of in quotes, these are the people that are like a smile with legs. They are happy all the time. They're really invested in wanting the other person to be successful, and they're full of joy. They'll make sure they know, where's the restroom? What do you need to do if you have to take a moment of a break? They'll make sure that the person has something to do for lunch, that they're not on their own. Did you know that 80% of the time when an individual decides day one that they're not going to stay with the company, it's because they don't have anybody taking them to lunch? Well, that sounds pretty basic, but I don't want to be hungry, and neither do you. And so that's an important thing to be considering. So your brand ambassador is a role that's an important role on day one. And you want to spiff your brand ambassador. You want to give them a gift card, or you want to give them something to thank them for being a part of a bigger job than themselves. So what's the outcome for orientation? The outcome is to get the person ready for training. Where I find that a lot of organizations make a big blunder is they jump in day one and they start doing training, and it's like boom, 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 boom. And the problem is the person is overwhelmed and doesn't get most of it. And so you want to take it softly and then build into what you're trying to build into. But let's go on. So the next piece of it is onboarding. So onboarding would be day 2 and beyond. And I'm going to say something in here that will shock you just a little bit, but I want you to be prepared for what's here in terms of onboarding is training. So know here that standard onboarding, 50% have greater retention, and 77% of new hires who have formal onboarding hit their first performance milestone. That could be, achievements after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever that might be. So here's onboarding. Number one role in onboarding is to identify the employee's value and impact. Where do they fit in? Why is their role important? What do they do? How do they make a difference in your company? Let me tell you why this is important. A number of years ago, I was working for a hospitality company, and I was asked to create a job description for a position within the organization. And this position was an accounts payable job. And I sat down with a woman who had been with them for quite some time, and I said to her, tell me about what you do. And she looked at me and her shoulders kind of slumped over, and she said, all I do is pay the bills. And I looked at her and I went, what? And she said, all I do is pay the bills. And I said, do you realize the importance of what you do? She went, no. And I said, well, if you didn't pay the bills, there wouldn't be any chicken, there wouldn't be any hamburgers, there wouldn't be any soda, there wouldn't be any employees that are actually working with the organization. There probably wouldn't be any air conditioning or heat or security to lock the door. I said, do you realize that if you didn't do your job, the company couldn't keep going? It was so interesting. In that one phrase, I watched her body language completely change. And instead of being hunched over, she was sitting up straight. She did a little bit of rooster, and she was really proud of what she was doing. So identify where this employee fits in and their value and impact. And introduce the job duties. What does that mean? Every single position should have a very detailed job description. What is it that I'm expected to do? And if you really want to know, I would share that job description during interviewing. And then I would measure the results towards the job description. Here's the way it works. And so grab a piece of paper. I'm about to give you a training platform. And that is, you take your job description and you identify in week 1, these are specific results I'm expecting you to achieve. I'm expecting you to understand how to ring in a typical order. I'm expecting you to know how to work our register. I'm expecting you to understand how to ring up a charge sale. I'm expecting you to identify this portion of the flowers that are in the warehouse. Why do you do that? Because you're tying the description into results that you expect. At the end of week 1, if you measure the results and they're ready to go, then you set them on to the training for week 2. If they're at the end of week 1 and they're not doing very well and they don't get it, then week 2, you do rinse, wash, and repeat, and you do the same training opportunities that you would do in week 1 and week 2. Let's say that they're very aggressive and day 3 of week 1, they're already getting it, then you can immediately move to the week 2 goals. But what this allows you to do is to measure results and to ensure that your expectations are met. So let's say, for example, you get to the end of week 2 and they're not getting it, then you might say to yourself, I've not made a good hire and it's time for me to move forward and to sever this relationship. You want to identify a mentor, and a mentor is a person that's a trainer. Now, let me give you a clue. As much as you may know the role, you're probably not a great mentor. And the reason that you're not a great mentor is that you may be focused on a duty and then be pulled here, and focused on a duty and pulled here. And so part of what you want to know is that your mentor has to be very patient, very methodical, and very focused. Now, onboarding could be ongoing for weeks and months because you want continuous learning to improve and make the role even more effective going forward. But the outcome is clarity, and I'm ready to contribute on a very regular basis. So here's 3 key takeaways, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Number 1 is understand why people are leaving and sell to your strengths. Don't feel like you have to repeat what other people are saying in ads. You're you. Sell to the things that you do. Put those in there and obviously be proud of them, but be prepared if somebody brings something up during an interview that you need to respond to, be ready to respond. Make the interview process real easy, quick, and memorable. Respond to people quickly. Do Zoom interviews for folks that aren't in front of you. And then remember the formula for interviewing. 2 close-ended, 5 to 7 open-ended, and 1 hypothetical interview, and give them something. You could even give them a flower at the end of the interview, and that would certainly make a big difference. And then the third is, remember, onboarding is ongoing. People continue learning, and you want to make sure that you have that and you're ready to go. So your burning questions, and I know that Janet has had the line open to gather some of those. So go forth, Janet.
Glenna, thanks a lot for sharing a lot of great information with us. As she mentioned, we are open for questions. So as a reminder, if you have a question, simply type it in that question box that's on the upper right side of your screen. Our first question is from Megan. She said she's had instances in the past where she's hired someone, and then after they start, she's like, I'm not sure that they're really right for the job. What should I do?
Megan, great question. So it really starts with a couple of things before you ever hire. One is to have a very detailed job description so you know exactly what you're looking for in terms of what's the role, what's the duties, and don't make it general, make it very specific. So if a person is expected to do certain things, you know, within a 7 or 8 hour period of time, then you can ask a question relative to that. Do the exercise with the 2 X's so that you know the qualities that you're looking for. So let me give you an example, Megan. Let's say that you say integrity for me is really important. I've had people work with me that don't necessarily have that, and it's been very, very difficult. So you might create a question that says, tell me about a time that you worked with an individual who lacked integrity. What was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome? And what would you do if you were faced with it again? That will tell you what their level of integrity might be and how they consider that as part of the question. And so you'll be able to measure that. The second and the final thing is when you're doing your onboarding, structure your training based on the job description. That way you'll know very quickly in week 1 whether or not this person has the capability, and you can make a change very, very quickly if you need to. So making sure you get the right person in the right seat is actually more about you, the manager, than it is about the candidate. So really important for you to be able to do. But thanks, Megan, and I wish you all the luck in the world in finding that right person for you. What other questions do we have?
All right. As a reminder, if you have any questions, type it in that question box. We have a question from Josie. She said she doesn't want to appear corporate. Do I really need to do all of this stuff when she's hiring for her flower shop?
Absolutely. The only reason, so I think people think corporate equals structured. I think corporate equals prepared and proactive. And the reality is, the more structured you are, the more ready you are for anything that comes up. Remember something, the people that are interviewing for you for your retail shop may be interviewing with Starbucks or Buffalo Wild Wings or another organization that may be more corporate, and they're comparing you to them. So this is really about you being prepared. It's about you being structured and running your business with consistency and ease. And so it allows you to be proactive. Absolutely, a job description is critical. The training helps you avoid some of the unemployment costs that you might have, and to save you time and energy in training and to have your team be engaged in working together more effectively. So the employee doesn't think of it as corporate, they think of it as prepared, having your act together and running your business the right way. So hope that helps. Thanks.
Awesome. We've got a question from Pete. So what do you do about habits like smoking?
Well, it's a great habit to talk about because it's such a big one, Pete. I think part of it is what you've got to be really clear about is what your standards of conduct are. So you remember when I said to you, share, and be clear about your vision, your values, your standards. I'm going to guess that when you're saying that that you're a non-smoking environment. So one of the things that you want to be very clear about in the interview is to say, this is a non-smoking environment. It's a non-vaping environment, and if somebody participates in that, then they certainly can do that on their breaks, but they're not allowed to come back into the location and smell of smoke because obviously that interacts with the flowers. So we need to be really upfront and let you know that's not something that you're going to be able to do as frequently as you might be wanting to do. And so you can't restrict them from smoking. You can't tell them that they can't smoke, but you can certainly tell them that that's not something that you allow on your premises. Hope that helps, Pete.
All right. Thanks, Glenna. Well,
Sure.
It looks like we're out of questions for today. We just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. If you missed a portion of the webinar or would like to view it again, a replay will be available on the FTD Mercury Network Florist YouTube channel later this week. We'll be sending you a very brief survey to gather your feedback on today's webinar. Please, we ask you just take a minute to complete the survey and help us improve future webinars and other education programs for you. As we turn the calendar to 2020, our next FTD webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, January 21st. FTD education consultant J. Keith White, AIFD, will share the hot new color palettes and key elements of the new American Floral Trends forecast for 2020-2021. Don't miss this opportunity to discover how to turn trends into traffic in your shop. Registration will be available at ftdi.com in December. Again, Glenna, we just want to thank you for sharing a lot of great information on recruiting, hiring, and retaining candidates. Everyone, thank you. This concludes FTD's webinar, Hiring for Results.
Have a happy holiday, everyone. Take care.